RugbyRenegade.com, the #1 online strength and conditioning program for rugby. Are you ready to get bigger, stronger, fitter, and faster and dominate your opposition? Welcome to the Rugby Renegade Podcast, where we build machines.
Hello and welcome to the Rugby Renegade Podcast. Today's episode is sponsored by Pro Athlete Supplementation. Check them out at pas-nutrition.co.uk for all your supplementation needs. And don't forget that subscribers to the Rugby Renegade program get a 40% discount on retail prices. Yeah, this is episode 43 of the Rugby Renegade Podcast. My name's Jamie Bain and today I interview Fergus Connolly, elite performance sports scientist and author of the book Game Changer. Great to speak with Fergus. He literally messaged him and then literally an hour later we were on the phone over Skype and chatting about sports science and the future of it. Some really good insights and some great advice for coaches. Particularly, we always ask what's advice you give to upcoming strength coaches, something that's very different to what we normally hear, but really, really good advice. So as always, guys, give us a listen and let us know what you think. Hi Fergus, welcome to the Rugby Renegade Podcast. Great to have you on. Why don't we start by you just telling us a little bit about your background, what teams you've worked with and how you got into your sports science role.
Good morning, Jimmy. Thanks for having me. That's a long question. I'll give you the short version. Most recently, I was with the University of Michigan with the football team. I'll work backwards, and I've just set up a consultancy company to advise teams, coaches, sports scientists, just based on my experience, which I've been fortunate to work with in the States, teams like the San Francisco 49ers, Atlanta Falcons, Jaguars, a number of other teams, and then also in rugby with the Welsh national team, consulted for some other teams as well. And I started originally in soccer with Bolton Wanderers, worked with Liverpool, with Blackburn Rovers, number of other teams. So I've been fortunate to work with some great coaches, some great teams, and it's really been I freely admit that it's really my passion, my hobby, and it's not really work for me. So I've just been fortunate to start, and particularly start at a time when sports science and more information was becoming available, and so been somewhat of a pioneer by accident, if you will. I'm not claiming a title, but it's just I came into the industry at a time when there's just a flood of technology, a flood of information, and it was like being a kid in a candy store. So it's been a fascinating journey.
Yeah, some great teams there, and like I say, it's great to be able to work in something you enjoy so much, and it doesn't feel like work, so to speak. So let's get straight into your book. Which, how long's that been out now? Game Changer. Tell us a bit about that and kind of why you wrote it and the kind of key messages.
Well, when my first job really was with, and you had the guy on a little while ago, Craig White, who, in my opinion, is one of the best performance directors and pioneers in the industry. He was a huge influence on me, not just professionally but personally. He was the closest that I've had to an older brother. Actually, Craig had wonderful success at Leicester and at Wasps, and when I came into to rugby with the Welsh national team, he had just been appointed, and he wanted someone to help him, from a sports science perspective. And I had known Craig for years, so I started as the first full-time sports scientist in international sport at the time, and it was like it was really, really smart of Craig to see to foresee how the industry was going to change, and that's almost 20 years ago. And at that time coming through, like I said, this was a hobby to me, and at this stage I wanted to write a book. I wanted to write the book that I was searching for at that time, because I was trying to help Craig improve a rugby team or to win games. And for me to find that answer, I had to read and study so many different books, academic papers, research papers, talk to people. And there wasn't one single resource that I could go to start with. You can't fit everything into one book, and Game Changer doesn't do that. But it was an attempt to give, the young Fergus coming through a starting point, and to present the ideas that I've been fortunate to learn, to give people a breadth of experience as well, or a breadth of sources. So, from all of the different industries, and also to make, for example, the rugby coach, the young rugby strength coach, or the rugby head coach aware of where else they can go to get inspiration and ideas from. So it's really, if you will, it's a book to help people start and then to develop their own philosophy from there.
Yeah, it's great motivation for it there. Now, I've seen a few things on social media you've posted recently, and they're kind of targeted at coaches. So was it also in mind for actual sports coaches as well, kind of information to help them use the sports science?
Yeah, absolutely. Because one of the things that has happened, is that there's been an explosion in backroom teams everywhere, in every sport. And as a result, in order to manage them, there are more and more silos. And the understanding of what a sports scientist does, or what a strength coach does, has actually become a bit diluted. The first rugby coaches, even Clive Woodward, Warren Gatlin, Joe Schmidt, Declan Kidney, all of these guys, Eddie Jones, they were all teachers originally. And when they started coaching, it was maybe themselves and one or two others, and maybe they got a local, retired army guy or whatever, soldier, to help train the team. That's not that long ago. It's not that long ago that all those coaches I listed were in classrooms, and there's been a sudden explosion. So it helps both strength and conditioning, sports science, to understand where the coaches are coming from, and it really helps coaches then to understand more and more about what sports science and strength and conditioning are doing, so that they can communicate, relate to each other, and essentially optimize performance rather than maximize. There's a big difference, and I think there's also a threat to the strength and conditioning community, that if we don't really understand better what coaches are trying to do, we pigeonhole ourselves into an area where we are not as effective or as valuable to coaches, and we just need to be aware of that, I think, for the future.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's one of the things you said earlier is that communication, and sometimes if you're not on the same page, like I could say speed to a coach and they can think of something completely different to what I'm thinking about, if you know what I mean. So it's kind of having that same language that people buy into and understand, and everyone's on the same page. Is that right?
Absolutely. I give this example in some of the talks that I've given. You can talk to the position coach and he might say, I want pop, or I want, as one of the coaches you say to me, I want twitch, and he's talking about what a strength coach would refer to as starting strength, like just pure explosion. You talk to the head coach and he's saying, I want fast feet. You talk to a sports scientist and he'll give you, a very technical answer, speed, strength, or strength, speed. We're all talking about the same thing. And the only way that this can be clarified is actually by watching film together as a group. And you don't do that in rugby. I shouldn't say you don't, but very few coaches do. The good coaches, the good strength coaches, sports scientists and rugby coaches, skill coaches, or whatever the sport is, do sit around and watch film together so that they understand, and that word, whether it's twitch, spark, whatever you want to call it, there's a clear understanding of what that is, and then you go fix it. And the other thing that's important is that that you identify the outcome that you were looking for, or the failure to achieve it, and clearly identify whether or not it's a technical, tactical, a largely coaching solution, or it's a physical solution. Because it could be either. It might appear to be that the player was slow, but it's actually a failure on the coach's part to help put the player in the right position, or to develop their game sense. So that is where the greatest room for improvement is in many rugby teams.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess also, you said the S&C and sports science in rugby especially is very young, and I think in the early days, young S&Cs kind of take what they can from different, from track coaches and things like that, and almost try and make a hybrid powerlifting speed program when it's not kind of perfectly for rugby. And I think that's where kind of coaches over the years are a bit apprehensive of us doing that, whereas now we're getting to the stage because of people like yourself of actually building a program based for the sport itself as opposed to a hodgepodge of all these different training modalities. But I think that's something that coaches need to kind of learn more about and buy into more for that relationship to be better. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I'm finishing a book called 59 Lessons, which is it's a list or an example of 59 different lessons I learned from people like Mark Bennett, Craig, Gatz, Sean Edwards, and from a rugby perspective, Conor O'Shea. And one of the lessons is why. In other words, when you go to learn from Westside, or you go to learn from Louis Simmons, or you go to learn from Charlie Francis, Dan Path, and you see them do something, whether it's tempo runs, whether it's accessory auxiliary workouts, the question you have to ask is why. Why are they doing it? Then why are they doing it? And then why are they doing it? Until you get back to the principle, the global principle, and understand that. When you understand why, for example, Charlie Francis does tempo runs, and you get to the source of it, then you can adapt it, rather than what a lot of people do is they just copy the technique, say tempo runs, and just apply it, or they take a max effort day from Louis Simmons and they just copy the technique without. When you understand the principle, then you can adapt the principle to your technique, and that's the secret to good programs. When you just go and skim the top of what different people do, you're not really understanding what it is that they do. So particularly if you're trying to improve max strength or you're trying to improve speed, get to the source, and then you can adapt your program. And I think that's something that, as the industry has grown over the last few years, I think people are getting better and better at understanding.
Yeah, definitely. So some of those things you put on social media, do you want to talk about maybe one or two of those, the kind of advice for the coaches? And one of the ones I saw was about volume and intensity, for example.
Yeah, so one of the things that, and this is, I guess, a piece of advice for sports scientists and coaches coming through, is that if you look at the omega symbol, basically you're traveling along on a pathway. We all go off and diverge, and we go and we learn all these different things, and then we come back to pretty much where we started, and we implement what we learned. One of the things that I've focused on, particularly in the last few years, is trying to simplify the message to coaches so that we can have a common language and a common system of communication. The system that I've used over the last few years is volume, intensity, density, and contact or collision. And you always start, before you go to those four things, just start with volume and intensity, and help the coaches understand that if we use this simple model of volume and intensity, and that we can only have one high or the other high, now you can start to schedule over the week. You can say to the coach, do you want a high volume day, low intensity, or do you want a low volume, high intensity day? And when he understands what that means for him, then you can match the strength and conditioning. And you can also match the recovery specific to that. So now we have a very simple system in place for communication, and you can now use just those two metrics in your GPS, your monitoring, your heart rate variability, and all these other things you use. You can use them to fit into this simple model of volume and intensity. People would say, well, that's too simplified. Yeah, it is, but it works, as opposed to a very complex system that doesn't. So you can start with that, and then you can build in the concept of density, which is essentially just work to rest ratio, and then collision and contact, which obviously in rugby is a huge factor. So start with that as your simple model for communication, and then you can start to build the complexity out.
Yeah. And definitely again, it's the language is important there, because it might take a while for those coaches to really understand. Sometimes you tell them you think it got it down, but from experience it takes a while of re-educating and constantly kind of work on that language for them to fully understand it. That's my experience anyway.
And just on the last point, what I do with that is with the coaches, I always use the word intensity and quality together, and I use quantity and volume together, so that in their language they start to focus more on the quality of execution, because that's very, very closely related to the nervous system fatigue that Charlie would talk about, or the demands on the nervous system to execute, whether it's a skill, a drill, a small-sided game. That's what you really want them to understand. So the intensity is a language that we use. Quality is the language that you really want them to use.
Yeah.
And that's the key thing, because at the end of the day, you win your game based on the quality of execution, not how many times you do it. You just have to do it once very, very well.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's a great little tip there, using that language. Now, this is something I've heard a few players, maybe even coaches say recently, or not too long ago, and that kind of sports science is making young athletes weak. You may have heard things like this. Ex-players coming out and saying, "Oh, we're kind of wrapping athletes in cotton wool." Looking at they're running too much, so there's risk of injury and that type of thing. What's your sort of comeback to that?
They're right. They're absolutely right. I think that many sports scientists, and we as a community have to acknowledge that when we got our GPS initially, and I made this mistake at the start, we thought that players who were above in the red zone, this mythical red zone, that this was dangerous and they were going to get injured. In reality, we didn't know what the red zone was. So we had what we thought were the limits that players had to achieve, and we had all kinds of formulas, but we were really trying to guess and find. So the GPS, or sports science, it's very, very important to understand this point. It does not answer any questions. It only provides a starting point to allow you to ask better questions. So sports science doesn't give you answers. It just allows you to ask better questions, and we have to be very, very careful. One of the mistakes as well that many have made is that they draw conclusions from incredibly small sample sizes. I don't care if you've got 3 or 4 years worth of data. The training programs have changed so much over the years. Like, do you really have a large data set to draw concrete conclusions from? I think we have to be very, very careful with that. So using the information intelligently is the first starting point. And I think one of the first things that you have to do is you can't use averages, and you can't use position specific data. You have to individualize the data and look from variations from the norm for that particular player, because you can have two players play the exact same position but achieve similar outcomes, but one relying largely on technical ability, and one player is just a physical stud. You see it in elite military units the same way. So I think we as an industry jumped ahead of ourselves and made recommendations to coaches a little bit too soon without understanding the context of the data. So, I always refer to the coaches, even, like I said, almost 20 years in the business. I provide, information, and we draw conclusions from it as a group. But you can't allow, these pieces of data to drive what is a people business, which we don't fully understand yet.
Yeah, because one of the, I guess, mistakes I've seen young sports scientists make in the past when they're new into the position is coming out and saying, "Oh, this data says they're definitely going to get injured," and you can never say maybe they're at a greater risk, but sometimes you've got those athletes, and you'll have those athletes in your squad who will be able to tolerate a lot more than other people, and it's you can never say, yeah, they're going to get injured. And I think that's what the big mistake I think some young sports scientists make, is kind of almost trying to justify their position and say this is what it is. But it's like you say, it's information, but it's never sort of set in stone.
Absolutely. And I know, like, I know of instances where, guys have lost their job over making, predictions that the team's going to lose a game based on readings on various pieces of technology. So it's a real risk. But that's as a result of failure to understand how complex the athlete is. And the other point is that the higher up you go in terms of professional or performance, the greater the ability of that athlete to draw on all of their functional reserves to achieve a physical performance. In other words, to surprise you based on, and that's why you see, a LeBron James or a Steph Curry or a Kevin Durant pull out wonderful performances even when they're exhausted. And that is the ability, that is essentially what an elite athlete is perfecting, year after year, that ability to draw on all of those reserves, to push the limits of human ability. And again, you see that in times of severe stress, when humans are under extreme stress, what they can actually do.
Yeah, definitely. Now, this is a question we ask all the guests on the podcast, and it's what do you think is the biggest mistake rugby players make when it comes to strength and conditioning?
Oh, I think when it comes to strength and conditioning, I think possibly it's overvaluing its place, and that's not to say that it's not important. Strength and conditioning is vital, but the focus needs to be on the quality of each repetition as opposed to the quantity. And I think it's that understanding that there is a limited amount of time that you should devote to it. And I think sometimes I think strength and conditioning coaches can help this a lot by emphasizing to the players that treat the weight room like the field in a game scenario. You have a limited amount of time. Every single rep must be of perfect quality because you only get one shot at this. So maximize every single effort, and as a result, your ability to perform improves, as opposed to spending, stretching out the weightlifting session. It's as much a mindset as it is a functional improvement to be made.
Yeah, no, I like that. So I'm going to pinch that off you and try and use that. Yeah.
I'm sorry, just because it's incredibly important when it comes to executing in a game. That we understand. I learned this from the military, having a conversation with a senior operator, and I was saying to him, look, there are two big differences. We were sharing learning lessons, and I said there's two big differences. One is we know when our games are, so we can plan, we can mini periodize. You don't, so you have to be in a state of readiness. And I said the second one is we get a second chance, and that is to some extent that is a disadvantage for us, because we believe that we can continually repeat. Changing the focus to have as few an opportunities as possible really improves the quality of every single repetition for the athlete.
Yeah, definitely. No, some good points there. Now, where do you see, or how do you see sports science kind of developing? Like it's still relatively young, or in its infancy. I think for a good few years, a lot of clubs and teams have been getting all this data and trying to figure out how to use it, and starting to find better ways of using it. How do you see it progressing from here?
I think that and this is a generalization, I think that sports science and strength and conditioning are being exposed to a threat at this point in time, and it's that we have begun to specialize so much. So if you take things like velocity-based training or GPS or HRV or any of these things, there is a point to which your specialization starts to diminish its effect on the result. So I think there's a certain level of specialization and detail that you must reach, and after that, then you really need to focus on the breadth of knowledge and your ability to communicate across the different silos that currently exist. So the sports scientist's ability to communicate, to translate knowledge, to understand how to integrate all of the various pieces, the strength coach's ability to understand more what the rugby coach is doing. That's where the biggest gains are to be made at this point in time. If you find yourself getting caught up in the detail of, velocity-based training or whatever, or whatever it might be, just take a step back and ask yourself, have I got all of these other areas covered as well? I'll never forget a nutritionist having a conversation with a rugby player years ago about the difference between chicken and turkey in terms of which was leaner. And, afterwards we sat down and we had a longer conversation about, why was there Gatorade in the fridges, for all of the players. And meanwhile, he's having a very detailed conversation about, something as irrelevant as chicken or turkey, the choice to make. So it's having that, it was a quote from Charlie Francis, the operation was a success, but the patient died. That at the end of the day, whether you're a sports scientist or strength coach, you're going to have a good career if your team wins. So never lose sight of the fact that you're there to contribute to the success of the team, and make sure that, I always use the phrase, we got to make sure there's water on the bus before we worry about lots of other details.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And just to use velocity-based training as an example again, obviously it's very effective and a good tool to use, but you don't need to know everything about it. You just need to be able to use it well enough to improve the performance of your players, and that's ultimately why you're doing it. So you don't have to try and impress them with these new types of things if it's not getting you that improvement in performance that you'll see will affect the game, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, and it's not, again, I'm not critical of sports science. I'm not critical of strength and conditioning coaches. I'm just trying to raise an awareness that we as an industry just need to be a little bit. We need to just take a step back and realize that if we become too specialized, we actually can become extinct, or there's a threat that we're not as important. So we just need to round our ability to impact the games that we love, whether it's soccer, rugby, or whatever it is.
Yeah. Now, next question. You've already just given some really good advice there, but what advice would you give to an upcoming strength coach?
If I was, I would, in your next contract, ask for whatever the figure is, a small figure for continuous professional development training, whatever it might be, $500 or whatever it is, and spend all that money on a sales course. Go and find a sales course and go and spend time doing a sales course. You'll be completely out of your comfort zone, but the ability to sell to someone is essentially the ability to gain trust and to communicate. This is a people business. If you can't communicate with someone of varying level, so if you take a salesperson who wants to sell a car or sell you a kitchen, God knows what, you're going to meet lots of different people that you don't like, but your job is to sell something to them. So you've got to gain their trust. You've got to find out what they look for. You need to be able to communicate with them, and you need to be able to present something that you have in a manner that appeals to them. Doesn't that sound a bit like strength and conditioning? And particularly the way that society has changed, the kids that are coming through now, your ability to communicate with this younger generation is really, you have to sell to get them to buy in. We all talk about buy-in, but nobody quite knows what it means. Well, take a small sum of money and invest it in doing a sales course, and it will just open your eyes. Don't go and find something that's completely out of your comfort zone, because you don't have any preconceived biases. You'll be completely out of your comfort zone. It will make you a better strength coach, because you will understand the importance of communication, trust, and buy-in.
No, I think that's brilliant advice. And you could have the best strength and conditioning program in the world, but if you don't get buy-in from the players, it's not going to be as effective. And also, we've had a few guests on the podcast in the past who've gone into different business ventures and things like that, and have said similar things, that business ultimately is dealing with people, and rugby and sport is that's hugely it's a people business. So you need to have those skills of communication and it's like, say, dealing with coaches. Sometimes you've got to sell them on what you're trying to do, and get them to buy into it. It's not just you can't expect to come away with a degree, a master's degree, and then just go they'll love everything you say. You've got to win them over. So that's brilliant advice, and echoed by some of the previous guests we've had.
Well, apart from doing that, if you go and spend time with Craig White or Mark Bennett, I think Mark Bennett's one of the best strength coaches I've ever been around, and apart from his knowledge in the area, his pragmatism is one of the most important skills that a strength coach can learn. He has a wonderful ability to keep in mind what the outcome is, the global outcome, which is to be a better rugby player, and then to understand, how important the weight room is to that. And it's being pragmatic and understanding. So he clearly understands that, when to tweak a program to make sure that the player still buys into it and still can learn from it. And many, many years ago, I will never forget at a conference, it was after a 3-day seminar, and Charles Poliquin was speaking, and after 3 days of presenting different weight training programs, somebody put their hand up at the back of the room and said, "Okay, Charles, we'll look at, after all these different programs you've shown us, which is the best one?" And Charles just looked down and answered, "The one the player will do." Yeah. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how good your program is. If the player won't do it, it's irrelevant.
Yeah. No, definitely. That's some great advice there. Thank you for that. Lastly, Fergus, where can people learn more about yourself?
I've got a new website being launched, fergusconnolly.com, and Game Changer is on Amazon, and 59 Lessons will be out hopefully later this summer. And I think that Game Changer, like I said, was my way for the next generation of sports scientists coming through to help give them some direction so that they can be, really have an impact in the game. And 59 Lessons is a way to say thank you to, so many different people, whether it's Charlie Francis, Dan Path, Eddie Jones, all these different coaches, Mark Bennett and Craig that you've had on, to share the lessons that I've learned from them for the next generation coming through, because I've been very, very fortunate just purely through timing, to get to spend time with people like Ashley Jones and Canterbury Crusaders and Robbie Deans and people like that. And there are just so many lessons that I think can save people so much time. And I think we all have a duty as well to say thank you to the generations that have gone before us, because we were very, very fortunate to be able to pull on a tracksuit in the morning and go in and work with athletes. There are a lot tougher jobs out there. So, I hope that it can help the next generation coming through.
Yeah, that's cool. And of course, we'll share all links to the website and to the books in the show notes. And let us know when the 59 Lessons come out, and we'll obviously share that with our social media following. But Fergus, thank you so much, and thank you for coming on at such short notice. It's been great to talk to you, and some really good, insightful points and some great advice. So thank you, appreciate that.
Thanks for having me, Jamie.
Cheers. So an awesome podcast there. Thank you, Fergus, for spending the time to talk to us. Some great insights, and great to hear from someone who's been at such prodigious clubs and teams, and worked with some amazing coaches, both S&C sports science and sports coaches as well. So thank you, Fergus, and all the best. And guys, check out his book Game Changer. I know I definitely will be. And of course, in the meantime, please subscribe to us on SoundCloud, Stitcher, TuneIn, and of course iTunes, and give us a 5-star review. And please get any questions into us you'd like us to ask the guests, or just ask of us. This is here to help you. So, I would love to have some questions from you guys to ask Fergus today. I'm sure we've got some great answers. So please ping them over to us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, even Instagram. And if you want to get fit for rugby, check out rugbyrenegade.com for loads of articles, ebooks, and of course our online subscription program. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to the Rugby Renegade Podcast. For more quality rugby strength and conditioning information, check us out at rugbyrenegade.com. Rugby Renegade, building machines.